So we're going to focus on foreign policy now. If you're standing up at the back at a coffee table, please come and join us. Make yourself comfortable over here, because we've got a bit of a treat coming up for you, I assure you. We're going to look at how leading democracies like UK and the India can influence the global order in this time of geopolitical flux, how to balance national interests with shared global responsibilities. So what are we going to be discussing? Well, evolving diplomatic strategies, the future of multilateralism, which sounds like a big word, but actually we're going to make it real for you, and the maintenance of trust between India and the UK within the South, the global South, and the global North. How do we make sure that communities continue to talk to each other? Well, that's what I'm going to be putting to our guest, Shadow Foreign Secretary, Right Honourable Dame Priti Patel, who I'm delighted to say has agreed to join us at IGF 25. Welcome, Dame Priti. Please sit in the middle. Yeah. So let's start with how UK foreign policy needs to evolve. The world is changing, right? We're living in a time of increasing geopolitical flux, a belligerent multipolar world. Where does the UK's self-interest lie?
So that's a very loaded question for a start, it really is. But look, first of all, thank you for having me here and for the opportunity to join this panel. You've already said the world is changing dramatically and very, very fast. I mean, all sorts of things are happening geopolitically. And that's not just in terms of world economic factors, trade deals that you've been discussing earlier on, but actually when it comes to global security and the threats that we face. They're evolving and changing all the time, even in the time where we'll sit and have this discussion. But you've asked about Britain's place in the world. Fundamentally, I've always maintained this. I've had the privilege of serving in governments at the highest level. It should always be about leadership, strengthening our work and our role with our allies, and personally I think some of that is quite questionable right now. Look at what's going on in the Middle East in particular. And you can't just be a government that, or take positions that, aim to be popular with people domestically. You have to think much more long-term.
Well, let's look at what's going on in the Middle East, right? It looks as if possibly the US is on the brink of joining in with Israel on the attacks on Iran, right? Who knows where that'll lead us? It may be very tempting, but do you think it's wise?
So I'm not at all surprised by that, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I'm very clear in my view that Iran is an adversary, and it has been. I've had to deal with Iranian state threats in this country, so I'm afraid I do know too much about this. But at the same time, we cannot ever allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons for many reasons that we could discuss for a long time.
But should the US, the number one hegemon in the world,
of course they should. They have a role to play.
Attack those Iranian underground bunkers?
Well, first of all, I think you've got to step back. You've got to recognize that Israel has been very clear in terms of being crystal clear. Iran has said, that Iran's objective is to obliterate Israel. So Israel basically acting in self-defense. They absolutely should be doing that. And of course, the United States of America, equally, they were the ones that facilitated talks with Iran, and those talks broke down. And now we're at this stage where the acquisition is beyond the acquisition of nuclear materials. It is effectively to stop any major nuclear threats materializing, not just for Israel, but for the West.
So it sounds like they have a role to play. The US then. What about the situation in Gaza? So only yesterday, we saw over 50 people being killed in the south of the Gaza Strip during a food aid distribution, which was really shocking. Would you urge Israel to hold back now in Gaza?
Well, I tell you what I would do.
Enough is enough?
I tell you what I would do, because I don't see enough of this anyway. I'm someone that spends nearly every other day questioning the government on this. I think Britain should be showing some leadership on this, and we should have better rapport and dialogue with the government of Israel, which, this government has admitted it's a very strange relationship right now, because they've chosen the path of taking sanctions against ministers. That's a separate issue, and really upping the ante against Israel in terms of rhetoric. One point about that is that is not helping bring peace, stability, or even feeding people in Gaza at a time when there's a humanitarian crisis. Britain, and I say this as a former International Development Secretary, we have a role to play. We are world leaders when it comes to humanitarian aid and crises, and yet you wouldn't think it at this particular time. Now, if I were in the shoes of those ministers, I would be urging, I would say to them now, to all officials and to the Israelis, we should be working together to do much more to get aid in. And by the way...
And to pull back from attacking.
Well, of course. I'm not even talking about attacking. That should not be happening. Let me just be clear about that.
Well, it's good to hear you.
I'm very clear about this. I'm actually speaking about Britain, the country that we live in, and the role of the government. They have a moral duty to be working with our allies to get aid in and to find innovative and different ways to do so. And I'm just.
And meantime, you see countries like Russia trying to get as an intermediary.
Let me just make a really important point on here. It was David Cameron last year when he was Foreign Secretary that found different ways to get aid into Gaza, including working with Cyprus to get a platoon in, to get a new bridge in, and he managed to get the Israeli government, this is a really important point, he managed to get the Israeli government to open up land crossings as well.
Okay, so
the question is, why isn't this government doing it?
Let's just look at the diplomatic situation that's going on around in the Middle East. We're seeing an absence of diplomacy. It seems to have failed, really, and powers like Russia trying to get in there.
Yeah.
Does that concern you?
Well, of course it does.
At the same time,
we should all be concerned about Russia. Russia has basically set its, look at the aggression it's got in terms of Europe right now with Ukraine. Russia is an adversary of this country. Look at its approach to Ukraine. This is absolutely, it's just appalling. And again, Britain, look at our history in this country. We were the country that fought tyranny in the Second World War. We're very proud of the role that we have played. And my party in government stood shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine and gave them all the support that was absolutely rightly required and needed. We should be unequivocal in our support when it comes to fighting autocracy and fighting tyranny and standing up for a country such as Ukraine.
Again, does that mean then, because it looks like the US has decided that its main focus is China, and as a result, possibly it will compromise and allow Russia a lot more space than we would have expected.
Well,
does that mean that the UK and Europe need to pick up more?
Well, I can't speak for the US administration, but absolutely, the UK should never vacate the pitch. We should never, ever vacate the pitch here. But it actually leads me on to another really important point. With Europe and our European allies, it does also speak about the transatlantic partnership, which is NATO, when it comes to our security and defense. We've got a really big responsibility to take up a leadership role in NATO.
Absolutely.
On defense spending and expenditure, but actually something else, and I called for this in January this year, how we collaborate with the United States of America on technology. This is in defense, on technology, but also future pipelines. And across Europe, not every European country can be producing the same kit. We absolutely need to be working together to look at the best practice, best value, and how we're all adding value strategically so that we're kept safe as a country. And fundamentally, we're always innovative, we're always putting money into our defense, and quite frankly, we're driving the right kind of outcome for not just Britain, but for the security of Europe. That is in jeopardy right now, thanks to Russia and what Russia's aggression in Ukraine is doing.
We've been talking a lot about trade and business so far at IGF 25, but we're seeing this increase in protectionism, regional economic blocs, and that's all happening at the same time as this geopolitical flux, right? They influence each other. They don't happen in isolation, right? So I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the UK's announcements of FTAs with Europe and with India? It's all happened in the last month. It's very new. What's your assessment? Do they go far enough?
Well, first of all, the FTAs are not new. We've had FTAs across the world under development, Britain and other countries, certainly now for the last 2 to 3 years. That is Britain's role post-Brexit. They're only possible because we've left the European Union. And I think we should just remember that very clearly. They take a long time to develop. They're subject to a lot of negotiations. And there's a lot of, they're transactional. We should be really clear about this. They're transactional in terms of, and you've heard the details of the various sectors, the pipelines, etc. That's all good. They're only frameworks, by the way. So as far as I'm concerned, and I can say this is a political point as well, they're building blocks. They're building blocks. You can start pillar one here, and then over time they evolve, they expand and develop. The one with India is really interesting for very good reasons, because back in the day, I remember the very clear discussion about doing much more in services, for example. We're a service economy. We're only scratching the surface of that in this particular trade deal. So in good news, there are plenty of opportunities there, and I'm sure the machinery of the government and the state will obviously work harder going forward on that. But there is something else here. There's really two important points to make. First of all, we are living in the era of protectionism, which is bad for everyone. Now, I'm a product of the 1980s, so I grew up watching, the free trade talks, the Berlin Wall come down, economic prosperity and freedom becoming a real tangible prospect for so many. We're seeing the reverse of that. But this is deeply challenging in such an unstable world. You need economic prosperity and economic freedoms to go hand in hand if you want to live in a secure world. Because without that, countries regress. They become more nationalistic, they become more protectionist, they almost by default in some cases become quite autocratic as well. That is not good for anyone, and we won't be seeing more FTAs come together if we see more of those types of behaviors evolve. So just on tariffs, we are in a world where we should be challenging tariffs, being much more robust in terms of trade remedies and things of that nature. I think there are lots of things that we could be doing. I personally think Britain can also share some of that with some of these countries that have been hit, with even higher tariffs from our friends across the pond in the United States.
So something occurred to me listening to you just now, Dame Priti. So let me play devil's advocate for a moment. You're known as being one of the biggest voices behind Brexit, a chief architect of Brexit, one might say. But the world today is so very different than in 2016. Mm-hmm. So is it time for us to rebuild bridges with the European Union? I don't just mean in trade, but in every level. Defense, science, technology, students, finance, and trade.
So we do that anyway. I think, there was a lot of, I'm going to say this because this is a very political point, the whole Brexit debate became hugely political and polarized. But the reality is, the point about Brexit is freedoms, the chance to have freedoms and to move out of the institutional straitjackets and frameworks that membership of the European Union certainly gave us. I speak to counterparts across Europe every single week, and I have been over to the European Parliament in the last month, and I've met the officials there as well as political leaders of other political parties and also friends in the CDU.
Really? What were you talking about?
And lots of things, actually. Well, first of all, because many of them, they're centre-right parties that are in government, so, they come to us, actually. They're coming to us for policy remedies, to look at how...
A sort of centre-right alliance.
So we have that anyway. My party's always had that. But when it comes to... I'll tell you one issue, because it's been raised on this platform today. Migration. In Europe, there's a crisis. I told them there'd be a crisis 5 years ago on migration and illegal migration. Now they're coming to us for some of the remedies around third-party country processing, changing their laws and changing their legislation. You didn't need to be a member of the European Union to actually have those conversations. So that's just one element. On free trade, I have to tell you now, they're all talking to us, particularly centre-right parties, around free trade and doing economic partnerships outside of the European Union. On defence, guess what? They're not following European Commission guidelines or guardrails anymore. They're doing it themselves. Look at what the Germans have just done with their constitution to increase defence spending. This is really vital, and I'm very clear about this. I mean, where we've got successful centre-right parties, Italy's a good example, the CDU another one, and I've been with them. In fact, I saw a colleague from the CDU just yesterday. They are talking to us actively about not just some of the things that we did in government on economic liberalisation, because Europe, let's look at the European marketplace and the European economy. It's been stuck in the slow lane of no growth, low growth. We've got that in this country as well. But they are very much looking at some of the work that we've done, because Britain is still a compelling place to do business.
But Europe remains our biggest trading partner.
Yeah, of course it does. Well,
so,
yes, but
given what's happened with the fracturing of trading relationships and the growing of trade walls everywhere, don't we need to reconsider
I don't subscribe to your view. I totally disagree with your view, if I may say so, because we do have the TCA.
Isn't there a compromise position?
But we have the TCA. That is a trade agreement with the European Union. I'm very happy to talk about that. We have our own trade-in arrangement with the European Union. It is the TCA. And by the way, we have a government today in this country who said we'd never achieve a trade relationship with the European Union. So we have that, and that is a good thing. And by the way, that evolves over time. We don't believe in wearing straitjackets. Trade arrangements evolve over time, and that's really important.
Okay, so even though at the moment it may not be delivering much, you have hopes for the future.
Well, it is delivering. It is absolutely delivering. It may not be delivering a huge amount in your eyes, but there's a reason. Just on the economics, Europe has been, post-pandemic, like the United Kingdom, a low-growth economy. That's why we need more trade-in arrangements and trade-in relationships. We all need more economic growth around the world so we can all do better. And I think Britain's best place to do that because of the fact that we're out of the EU and we do have trade arrangements in place.
So we need growth, obviously, and we need scale, and Europe gives you scale. And the other big market that gives you scale is China, and we haven't really spoken about it. So let's talk a little bit about Britain's relationship with China.
Sure.
There's this really tricky path that it has to navigate between economic access and good economic relations and security concerns, right? Can you talk to us about how you see Britain navigating that tricky path?
Well, I think first of all, we've always had a strong economic relationship with China. That's obvious, right? China manufactures a very significant percentage of the world's goods, and they don't just come through here, they go to every single part of the world. That's really important. We have to keep that going. If I may say so, there was quite an extraordinary situation just when the Trump tariffs came in. You might be aware of this. We saw goods literally being stockpiled at ports in the US. And then obviously once the tariffs were announced, no goods were coming through. We're never going to be in that situation because we have trade-in relations and trade-in arrangements. The big but about China, and I can't emphasize this enough, I've looked after the national security of this country in previous roles. They are an adversary to our country. So I've seen the state threats from China. I'm the one that basically had to take out the executive orders when we had Chinese spies in our parliament at the heart of Whitehall, in our institutions, and working with our intelligence and security services. So, if you care about your country and you're in government, you have to make sure that, number one, you are protecting all the major equities of your country and your people and your populations. I've seen what they try to do to our government departments. So, we see what they do with cyber attacks. We see all the things that they've done. I remember the COVID pandemic. I think everyone's forgotten about it now, but I saw what they tried to do with misinformation and disinformation around the vaccine. We saw all sorts of things take place. So we have to have our eyes wide open, and economic relationships and economic dialogues, because this government does, I think they've just had an EFD, an economic financial dialogue with the Chinese government. That's one thing. But at the same time, you keep the economic pipelines and, the lifeblood going. We all need to do that because we have to have that. But I think we should be really very clear about the security implications for our country.
It's a very tricky path to navigate.
And by the way, it's not just our country, it's also our allies. They all face the same threat.
Indeed, and so does India, which has been very clear-eyed about China being one of its chief adversaries for a very long time now, decades. How could the UK work more closely with India to develop a joint strategy in terms of combating?
So I've been very pro this for a long period of time. So don't forget, there are lots of things that take place that people will never know about. That is behind the scenes, that is classified, that's the security work. So that does take place. And actually, people should be totally reassured about how all that works. I think actually on defense and security, we have not done enough. It is a complicated area for reasons we can't just openly discuss here. But I genuinely think, look, we've just done a FTA with India. I think, as I've said, that should be foundational and it should pave the way for future deeper relations on some of the, I'd say, security defense collaboration. I genuinely believe that, I really do. That involves technology, that involves innovation. It literally involves sort of the kit that, India could also use. We want our allies, we need our allies to be strong when it comes to security and defense, and that is beyond intelligence sharing. So, I think we've always been very open. Whichever government, quite frankly, is in charge, they should all be absolutely focused on that, because we work with our allies around the world, not just India, but other countries in this particular sphere.
Indeed, people often say that India and the UK are natural partners because both big democracies, an old democracy and a very large democracy. But on some geopolitical issues, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war, there has definitely been a divergence of views, yeah? So how should London and Delhi manage these differences in strategic outlook and find areas of commonality on which?
So I think we do. Look, I think we do, and it's not for us. I mean, I feel quite strongly about this. It's not for Britain to go around the world lecturing our allies at all in terms of some of their own bilateral relations. In the same way, we wouldn't take too kindly. You know, if I was sitting here in a ministerial position, we're not going to take too kindly to getting lectures about the type of bilateral relations we have. Ours is a very unique relationship with India. First and foremost, it's about people. You know, I say this as a Gujarati Indian. I say this in terms of our community in this country who are outstanding in terms of heritage, contribution to our country, the way they shape our country, and, you know, really represent all aspects of society, civil society, the business world, etc. But what I do think is that, you know, we do have to have private conversations. I'm just going to use one example. You've heard me mention the one multilateral organization, or one, you know, EU and others. The BRICS, look at the way the BRICS are coming together. Their values are not our values, but let's be quite candid about that. They've got a different outlook. So with that outlook in mind, it doesn't stop us from speaking to, like I said, China on the economic side of things, but we are big skeptics. Absolutely, we should be. India, we know where Narendra Modi stands, you know, within the BRICS and all the rest of it. But we have a different and unique relationship with India that, by the way, I don't think many other countries in the world has. So for us, it's how we are equal and respectful to India in terms of the way India has opened itself to the world in an incredible way under 11 years of Prime Minister Modi, and all credit to him for the way in which he's done that and put India on the global stage. But I think there are some key areas that we need to continue to grow, build and enhance.
And how can we build global trust? I mean, one of the things that the Ukraine war has done is really highlighted differences between the global south and the global north on this issue, right? So unfortunately, it has. So what can UK and Britain do to try and rebuild trust between the global south and the rest of the world?
So I think it's his leadership. Sometimes you have to stick your neck out, you know, and either say unpopular things or literally, you know, be there at a time of crisis and when your friends need you. Britain did that in Ukraine. We did that for Ukraine. No question about that. We're a country that convened for Ukraine. And, you know, quite frankly, I'd like to think any other government would do exactly the same. We did it in a robust way. But also with that, you bring others with you. You bring others with you when there are shared equities and they know that, you know, it's our futures, future generations, our economic prosperity and security. The security and, you know, prosperity issue go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And I think also with our standing in the world and our history, we're kind of like uniquely placed, island country. We've had a lot of, you know, we've had to stand up for ourselves, quite frankly, historically, in a way in which, you know, other countries may or may not have had to. So I think, you know, leadership is a really big factor, and we have some very, very strong allies and alliances in the world. And now, more than ever, we kind of like need to be with them, shoulder to shoulder, making sure we're watching each other's backs. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff behind front of house that takes place, which is incredibly important, but I think really does serve a very strong and unique purpose here.
We've talked about trade. We've talked about cultural links and what we have in common in building partnerships. So I'd like to ask you finally to cast your eye to the future. What do you hope will be the defining feature of the UK-India partnership over the next decade? What would you like to see that we don't have at the moment?
So I think it is more, I think it's the ease of the relationship alongside the ease of doing business. I've already touched on, you know, the FTA is one pillar right now, maybe one chapter. One chapter is the best way to describe it. We need many other chapters to follow. And I think having gone through the first phase right now, the first chapter, we need it to become slightly more, you know, effortless, natural, you know, and
so we're going to be talking a lot about books in a short while.
I gather.
What would you like to see written in the chapters to follow?
I think it has to be, you know, it's almost like an unspoken relationship because it's a natural synergies between our two countries, and it's the golden thread, the DNA that binds us together, and I think that's really the best way to sum it up.
Dame Priti Patel. Thank you so much for joining us
so much.
at IGF 2025.
That's great. Thank you.